Welcome everybody to our October 21st Cardea Users Group meeting. This meeting is being recorded. If you have issues that you would like to not be recorded, we can pause the recording, let either Keela or myself know, and we'll make that happen. It probably will be a shorter meeting today. We have a very brief agenda. We are meeting under the umbrella of the Linux Foundation, and therefore we adhere to their antitrust policy. The antitrust policy is listed in the meeting minutes, the link to that. So if you want the full details, basically we're not discussing pricing or other antitrust type activities that would be prohibited under US or applicable foreign law. The Cardea Code of Conduct is listed there as well in brief summary. That's be nice to everybody and everyone has a voice. Introductions. Would anyone like to introduce themselves today? I think most of the people on the call are familiar with each other, so we can move on to our agenda. I'd like to go over a brief update on machine readable governance. James, do you have an update on development status of machine readable governance?
I would, on the enterprise side, I would defer to Ammon. However, on the mobile side of things, we are starting to do some planning on a proposal of how to add this to areas framework JavaScript. I expect that we'll have some discussions with Mike on additions to the governance that may be more specific to the holder or verifier roles. And also going to be working through the actual fetching of the governance file, because I know we had problems here previously from the React Native perspective, may be related to self-signed certificate issues, but that is something that we currently have planned. So expect to have progress on the holder perspective that we may be able to show in future calls. That's the high level from me. Sean, anything that you'd like to add that I missed?
No, I think you summed it up pretty well.
Thank you. Ammon?
Yeah, I don't I don't know if I can give a super detailed report, but from what I understand, progress is going pretty well. And yeah.
Would you like me to say a word there, Ammon?
Yes, yes, please.
So with the enterprise, we are moving into the last phase of work for a particular project that we're working on. So we have everything up through privileges and presentations and validation working. Our next step is to do workflows and rules engine kind of work that would exist outside of the data provided by a credential. So those are our next steps and some of the things we've accomplished.
Understood that you have presented this in a number of other meetings. Would you like to give a brief summary of some of those?
So we presented at a session at IIW, and the general consensus in the community there was that we've solved some of the problems that people had been wondering about how to do. And they were excited about when they could get their hands on the code, and also to see progress in future directions, such as discovery of governance frameworks and possible work with things like trust registries. We also presented to the Indicio meetup, and we're scheduled to share with some node operators in November. We've also been encouraged by the Aries working group, now that we have code in use, actual written code instead of theory, to write an RFC that rather than being a proposal or forward-looking, have it be an RFC that's more like a spec or an interop profile.
That all sounds like very exciting developments, Mike.
So Aries community would like to see a formal RFC proposal.
Yes.
Good.
And what's the one that's coming up in November?
The Indicio node operators meeting. So for people using the Indicio nets and running nodes, we'll be presenting to them. In case anyone's curious, we have several machine readable governance videos posted on the Indicio YouTube channel that they can go watch if they missed the presentations.
Just quick question, would that RFC be titled an RFC for machine readable governance?
I don't have an official title, but something like that, yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Another one that I would like a brief update on is our upgrade from Akapi from 0.60 or yeah, 0 from 0.6 to 0.7. Is that work underway, scheduled, or completed?
At this moment, unfortunately, none of the above. I don't think we've scheduled it or started. It is becoming a high priority though. For the same project that the governance is for, we need to be able to upgrade to present proof version 2.1, and that will require an upgrade to Akapi. So although it's not scheduled, it will be due in about the next 6 weeks.
So not started, but
Exactly. Not started, not
the next
exactly.
6 weeks puts us before the end of the year,
Yes.
give or take a little extra buffer in there.
Cool. That's all I really wanted to find out, just so that we could be aware of how closely we're tracking Akapi's progress. On internationalization, I wanted to talk with our development group and establish what we're planning to do there. There is work that could be done on both the issuer, government agents, verifiers, and mobile holders. Do we have, I would like to try to talk about the priority of that effort and not assume that it would all come at once.
Do we want to bucket it for that discussion of prioritization, Ken? So that we can kind of like say compared to the other things, this thing is higher.
Yeah, so the 4 different things that I see are the mobile holder, the health issuer, the government agent, and the mobile
Verifier.
and the cloud verifier.
And before we go into prioritizing that, James commented that Akapi 0.7.2 might be released soon. Is that going to impact the timing of the upgrade if you might be waiting for the 0.2 release? Or is that once you get
it-
to 7, is the 0.2 release much easier to manage?
It should be much easier to manage. I mostly wanted to raise that as a communication that was a release that would be happening soon, so that based off of the timing, like it'd be helpful to be aware that may want to go straight to 7.2 versus 7.1 and then have to do 7.2 like a week later kind of thing.
Right.
Our schedule is unfortunately pretty full and not very flexible for the enterprise team. And so we're likely to have to take whatever's available, 7.1 or 7.2 when we get to it, and then schedule following upgrades the next time we can do an upgrade cycle in a few months.
Got it. So that's important. Just interesting to know. Do you know, James, since you brought it up, is there anything significant in the 7.2 compared to 7.1?
I'm a little light on my recollection of the details there of like features that we would specifically want. But I don't think that an upgrade from 7.1 to 7.2 would pose a significant upgrade burden, but I am also not the enterprise team there. I don't know where the release will happen for whether there will be a 7.3 release, a 0.8 or 1.0, but I would expect in a following release there will be a multi-ledger support, which I think could prove very useful and relevant to this group.
Okay.
Cool. Any other comments about the Akapai upgrade? I'm really just trying to bring this up as a kind of a heads up to all the community members to let them know that an upgrade from 6X to 7X is in the works. Knowing that it's coming may affect some of their plans to perform similar upgrades in their own code bases. So that's just a heads up there, not trying to change its priority or move it about or anything like that. On internationalization, I want to the reason I want to discuss this is so that we can set proper expectations so that we're picking out where we're going to focus our efforts and what we're likely trying to accomplish with the first release of an internationalized part or all of Cardea.
Ken, do we need to break it down even further after this? Because then there's the different layers of what can be, like there's the language layer, or is there the values? Are there sub bullets to each of these that we need to consider?
There are, I'm trying to do this from a fairly high level to say that we're not planning to spend a lot of effort on particular areas because we're going to focus our attention on a smaller subset. And because I think that's trying to eat that elephant all at once might cause us to choke. I'd rather have us identify areas of greatest benefit and areas where limited language support, to not try to internationalize the entire product in one fell swoop, but see if we can do a piecewise. Yeah, that's the whole point of the discussion, is to try to identify future work and then to queue up where we think the greatest benefit would be. James.
To help break down this into smaller pieces, because I do think that is helpful, is one of the one piece that I think is a smaller bucket is the credential display, because that's taking your schema and doing overlays on that, and that is probably likely a different process than overall internationalization across an app, for instance. And so that could be something that's tackled before the app, where the the display of the credential is in English while everything else is in French, which isn't great, but that is a step that could be taken.
Okay. So
I would concur that the credential overlays is probably the right place to start. I think that we could probably link to something similar to a credential manifest from the governance so that every party involved could access this same credential overlay file. And therefore you'd have a single point to reference for label updates and things like that related to the credential.
Got it. You're talking about the credential headers, basically, because the content, of course, is not going to get overlaid in that.
Yeah, talking about the labels that say, you know, vaccine
date.
issued by, or, you know, given, you know, in English and Spanish and French, test date, you know, whatever the equivalent values are across languages.
Got it.
For the
And
labels.
that's static as well. So that would probably be cross applicable.
Mhm.
Something that I'm not sure if it belongs, like it may be wise to rely on other portions for this, but like, so one of my thoughts is it could be beneficial to have the overlay indicate this is how this should be displayed for this audience. So for instance, date display should be this way in this location and in a different format in this location. That could be, you could rely on other existing mechanisms to do that, but there also could be benefit of having that be from an overlay perspective. I haven't given that too much thought or discussion, but that is something to consider.
Yeah, we definitely have to brainstorm some more on this.
So onto the components beyond the credential display. I mean, my initial reaction is if you want people to use it, they need to be able to use it in their language, and that would be the mobile holder.
Correct. And I think, and I may be missing some nuances, but I think the rest of the application is likely to be like a fell swoop, because it could be done iteratively, but you're essentially going to be providing identifiers for strings that can point to different languages based off of their locale. So, or settings, if you will. So the initial hurdle of getting things set up is likely the most challenging part. So switching over the actual rest of the application shouldn't be super challenging.
Can I just dissect that for a second? Are you saying
Yep.
that the work for the mobile holder could then be leveraged for the other parts, or it's the mobile holder as one thing, and then all the other components are kind of bundled into a second thing?
or are you
More saying that you wouldn't want to do internationalization just for the registration on the holder, and then separately do it for a separate screen, and then another screen. I think you could do it all in one fell swoop
Oh,
for the
got it.
holder.
The whole
And
component.
then- exactly, and then probably a whole fell swoop for the mobile verifier.
Which is why Ken left it in these chunks.
Yes. And I think there could be other areas that we would want to identify that are smaller components, but I think a full chunk is how I would tackle that here.
James, is the code base, for instance, if we targeted the mobile holder as potentially the one of greatest benefit, is that updating the Aries framework JavaScript, or is that updating the equivalent, the bifold itself, or is that updating the Cardea UI derived from bifold?
You could either take the route of for the app display, you could either take the route of updating the Cardea bifold derived UI, or update the bifold. But one of the efforts that is now going on in the bifold community is creating reusable UI components that could be utilized in your application. And this would be somewhere where you would want to have internationalization available. The Cardea app doesn't currently utilize that So there would be a requirement to update Cardea to use that mechanism. So there's kind of two routes there, one a little bit more complicated, but better, one that would work better or would work in the short term.
Okay. Is there anybody who thinks that something other than the mobile holder app would provide the greatest benefit?
Do we need to should we number them 1 through 5? I think there's 5. 5. In terms of priority, Ken, is that what you're looking for? Like that level of detail?
Yeah, something like that. And we
Okay.
don't have to stick to it exactly, but if we have a general idea of where we think the greatest benefit would be, then we can follow that priority. Anybody disagree with the mobile holder being the first target? I'm open to other suggestions, proposals for number 2, if there's no objection.
I would somewhat almost propose the mobile verifier because that's likely to be on the ground in that location.
As 1 or 2?
As 2.
I was going to say the same thing.
Also, given that we would have already done the work on the mobile holder, the setup and the process should be very similar to the holder. So duplication of effort, which is helpful.
So reuse of the same strategy in both the mobile holder and mobile verifier gives a higher bang for the buck in terms of the development cost.
Agreed.
Proposal, any counter proposals for number 2? Mike, I noticed you're not jumping right in there saying, no, me, pick me.
I think the one thing about the mobile verifier is that it is a little simpler, right? Because they're going to get yeah, you're good, or no, you're bad. And you don't need a lot of language or other things to be able to figure that out. So it also seems like a little bit less valuable just because it's simpler. I'm not sure if there's more to it than that, but that would be one sort of argument against prioritizing the mobile verifier. But I agree that it is very end user facing.
What I think you'll find is that once you do the holder, the verifier is a fast follow. I think that once you do the enterprise issuer, whether it be the lab or the government, the other issuer, government or lab, and the enterprise or cloud verifier will also be fast follows. So really it's mostly a prioritization of mobile agents versus cloud agents. And I vote mobile agents and holder first and verifier as soon as they can get to it, followed by cloud agents, starting with probably the lab and then the others as fast as we can get them done.
Like that. Health, government, enterprise verifier. Do we have anybody else have a differing opinion? Take the silence as a resounding no. So I think we can let it stand as this. It's subject to change, but just to give an idea of how that will roll out, it's not likely to be all accomplished in one fell swoop. Likely to come out piecemeal and likely to follow first credential display and perhaps date fields, and then move on to other aspects of the other UI strings that might be involved.
And where does
It's
machine?
worthwhile.
Oops, sorry.
So, sorry, Kiwa. I was just going to say it's worthwhile noting that this is the mechanism to do internationalization. However, I am not able to actually translate things into other languages. So that is an effort that would need to happen in parallel in order to actually make use of the tools here.
So we need to recruit some bilingual.
some local,
helpers.
after the internationalization has occurred, localization has to happen to get strings translated. Are there target languages that are most desirable?
Spanish.
Yeah, I imagine you just start at the top of most used in the world and work down the chain. So like Keela said, Spanish. I don't know what's next though.
Probably some Eastern
French, maybe.
European language.
So there's two considerations here. One is what's most
Users.
desirable and what's available. Since we have some bilingual people in our community, we may be able to take advantage of getting some of that expertise. I'm going to suggest Russian for
Yeah.
When half your enterprise team speaks Russian, that's kind of going to happen, huh?
will probably happen. So not that the Russians particularly need localization, but since we have the talent available, so it's there's market consideration.
We also have French, I would put on the list because we have access and we may be able to include them given the work going on in Canada and beyond. I could have added that. Sorry, I can multitask for you here.
That's very well. I can either talk or type, but not both at the same time. Okay, so those are some likely languages. So once we get a localized or an internationalized version of any of the products, then I would like to try to start recruiting volunteers who are bilingual to help with translation. Typically, that means that we have to start considering how the language files are represented and how to send that to somebody, and then vet what comes back to make sure that it doesn't like explode the user interface when plugged in.
And can you just remind me where this intersects with the machine readable governance? Are we strictly talking about the UI layer, or is there also a hook back in to the machine readable governance?
I think on the list of priorities for internationalization, the machine readable governance, at least as it currently stands, is pretty far down the list because there aren't a lot of display strings in the machine readable governance. And so the burden of choosing how to display things in different languages mostly lies elsewhere.
So perhaps
a little bit more much.
Be the other way around and say the machine readable governance might suggest or dictate which internationalization or localization files should be used?
Oh, certainly as a method to what's the word? Assist or help the internationalization process, we could use links through the governance file. But as a, so you're right. As far as actual words involved, there aren't many in the governance. As far as a way to facilitate, there's the word I was looking for. It might be a good place to refer to things.
And what about the values, like negative, right? Negative is, are we assuming that the content of the credential will continue to be in English? When do we talk about internationalization of the content? Is that like, talk about that in a couple of months?
I think that's on that is the credential display. Maybe I didn't vocalize that enough, but I think that the actual values and content of the credentials, that is tied into the credential overlays to determine how that the values as well as labels will be displayed.
Got it.
I don't know if we want to tackle that immediately. Like, priority to me seems like the whole app itself, you should be able to use, even if the format is a little not great. So I would propose doing the app UI display first, and then move to the credential overlay display.
Well, in addition to the overlay display, there's the validation through the governance of the actual content of the values. So we're already looking at having to generate potentially several presentation definitions just to deal with the governance in English. And then if you change what is encoded as negative, if it's null or plocha or something in another language that says bad or negative or whatever, then you affect the tools that actually run the business logic, and that could be an interesting discussion.
I think we should avoid that for the short term, to require all the values to still be in English for the values of the things, and maybe have assistance display to say, here's an English value of this credential, and here's what it means in the other language. And so that's a display thing, but not a value thing in the credential itself.
Okay.
For the short term, certainly that sounds very helpful.
I think that would get us to something internationalized so that people can use it, but not deal with the complexities of multiple international values for field attributes.
Okay, got it.
Okay, that's kind of I'm trying to lay out the kind of the plan for how local internationalization, localization can occur, so that as we have upcoming sprints, we're able to incorporate as resources are available into the development schedules to cover that. Anything else that anyone wants to say on internationalization and kind of the roadmap and priorities? If not, let's go on to my next favorite topic, a requirement for HTTPS as the transport. So there's been some discussion about, because DIDCOM is transport agnostic, it stands to reason that you could use something that's not secured, such as HTTP, to support the transfer of data. However, specifying HTTPS might make our life simpler from both a technical standpoint of only having to test and try one method, and it might make adoption by some of the governments or medical institutions an easier path to sell because of the perceived value of an HTTPS connection, and it's a already accepted use in a trust or security assessment of a particular system. So I would like to propose that we adopt HTTPS as our transport and state that in our interop profiles, so that we can clearly set an expectation that HTTPS will be used, so that we can avoid some of the political negativity or the debates that might ensue about the strength of DIDCOM's encryption, and focus more on the more essential things of how do we issue credentials, how do we transfer credentials, and not get hung up in unnecessary debate about transport level issues. Are there counter arguments to that?
I second your opinion that it should be HTTPS.
So I would like to, Trevor, suggest that we update our governance to require that. So not just put that in our.
You want that to go under security?
Yes.
James, do you have a comment?
Yeah, something that we didn't actually talk about too much internally when we were having discussions on this was I would also have a recommendation here that communication over WebSockets would also be utilizing TLS for the same reasons as HTTPS. If since we are looking to have a requirement here, those are our two primary mechanisms for communication. So I recommend that as well.
To add a TLS requirement?
For WebSockets.
So secure WebSockets is typically the name of that, and I agree with James.
If we're going to go that route, I would also add that it should be 1.2 or greater, since that's the general security sort of assessment of TLS at the moment.
Thumbs up.
So adding a similar requirement for WebSockets to ensure that we're using TLS 1.2 or greater to, again, avoid any problems with potential security assessments. Is there anybody who has an issue with the WebSocket addition to our governance? Thanks for that.
No, but how should the HTTPS be phrased?
I would something with you, if using, then you must use HTTPS.
If you,
When if used, it we'll help you with language on that, but it's basically saying that when selecting between HTTP or HTTPS, you must use HTTPS.
mhm.
So Trevor, this does need to go in your language, but I want to underline that this is not because we're concerned in any way about the encryption security of DIDCOM messaging natively, but because what we really don't want to do is get a worthwhile project hung up because someone is misunderstanding what we're saying. So by defaulting to HTTPS, it avoids all of those conversations. Yes, there's redundant double encryption going on. That's a small price we're going to pay to just simply avoid all of those conversations at this point.
And some people
So-
have a requirement to use HTTPS regardless of the merits of DIDCOM. There's, you know, they say I can't bend the rules. I have to use it.
Right.
And so don't have that conversation with me.
And in some future world, there's going to be a different discussion because of the better understood qualities that DIDCOM has, but today is not that day. And so to sort of avoid unnecessary conflict, this is a way around it.
Some language you could use there is you could say something like, when connecting to Cardea agents, you must use HTTPS or secure WebSockets that support TLS 1.2 or greater.
That's good. That's good. That's
Well stated. Is there any other discussion or on the HTTPS or TLS 1.2 plus topic? I don't think that there was some internal debate about whether we should allow for both. And our current conclusion is that especially in the case of medical credentials, that the adoption would be facilitated by using HTTPS, even though it does introduce double encryption for most things going across an HTTPS connection. But better double encrypt and have people adopt than argue with them endlessly and have them reject the whole project over something that is not a big concern. Also, next topic was Interop Profile. Right now, our Interop Profile is not as formal as it could be. There's a couple of ways that we could address that to make it easier for people to understand what we're doing. One method is to simply use our machine readable governance to contain most of the details, but I think that would be lacking clarity for people who can't ferret their way through a machine readable governance file. So it might be good to summarize the protocols and requirements that we have to let people do a fairly quick assessment of where their particular implementation might stand. So I would like to formalize our Interop profile and follow a model similar to what the Aries Interop profile is using. Are there is anybody find a better proposal for that or object to that? Thoughts on how to best express our Interop profile?
I've not written a formal interop profile, and so starting with an example like the Aries interop profile is fine with me.
I don't think I have an opinion on this, which is shocking because I almost always have an opinion.
Sam, I would like your opinion on that one.
The Aries Interop profile was voiced, but are we targeting which one? We have an old, better supported, and a new, less supported on the table.
So there's two questions that you've introduced there. One is having a model of what our interop profile consists of, and then what is the representation of it? And if we follow the model of the Aries interop profile, that could express how we want to do it, or we could simply say our interop profile is the Aries interop profile with these additions. Those are two different ways that we could express it.
Okay, sorry, I misunderstood some comments then. So I like the Aries interop profile model. It's not very different from the trust over IP one as well. They're very close cousins there. And I think it's probably better, rather than to say it just is the Aries interop profile, to point to the Aries interop profile from within our own. And then that gives us a ready place to note any exceptions. For example, we have just decided that HTTPS and secure WebSockets are to be used, even though DIDCOM generally allows both. And that would be something that we'd place in our own. So we don't want to just wholesale adopt someone else's, but you can point to another interop profile from within your own for where it is useful. That's what I think.
So you would call the interop, the Aries one, and then say and then your profile would say where there are differences from the baseline.
Yeah. And now that's only useful if there's a large number of things. If there's a small number of things you want to pull from the other interop profile, but whether it be the Aries one or a different one, then I think it's probably just worth repeating and acknowledging rather than externally referencing. But if you're going to be 90% or even 75% the same as the other one, it's probably just worth linking and noting the differences.
Do we have any sense of that percentage overlap yet?
We're probably 95% overlapped.
Okay.
I think
There are
the
some
biggest
additional things-
exception.
Go ahead, James.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think the biggest exception that we have is the connectionless. We are not doing connectionless presentations or issuance, which I think would probably be the biggest difference from the AIP one. But I think, so I would agree that it's a high percentage.
Yes, it's a fairly high percentage. And that's not a big surprise, but given that we're based on Aries Cloud Akamai and Aries Framework JavaScript and bifold. So big surprise there that we would be highly aligned with Aries interop profile. Other discussions on, I would like to create a file that is the Cardea interop profile and have it checked into the repo so that people can readily see what we're doing and not have to either be knowledgeable about the project ahead of time or know its derivative from the Akamai and Aries Framework JavaScript and bifold projects. Knowing that, you can infer a lot, but I don't like to leave things to inference. I would rather state them boldly. Okay. Anything else on interop profile?
One of my questions here on an interop basis is we've had the use of a trusted traveler, and I was curious how that fit into Cardea's scope, whether or not that is a optional requirement or what the thought process there is.
I don't think that we've mandated the use of the trusted traveler, but we provided it in our reference implementation. We test for it. We show how well people can use it. And I think that it's a good feature in line with the Good Health Pass initiative. So I think it's sufficient to have it offered. Mandating it, I think, is something that might go beyond the scope of what we're trying to accomplish. There are people who in the government may not ever get to requiring the use of any type of credential domestically inside their country. They may stop the use at the health evaluation and giving a thumbs up or thumbs down for a person to travel and not require anything locally. So I don't want to mandate the use of a trusted traveler because it may overstep what the sovereign nations are planning to do.
That makes sense to me. One of the things that I would raise here is that as a potential option is that there are, I'm actually forgetting the terminology used, but in the AIP2, there are sub-targets available, which allows you to specify if you are targeting a specific subset, this is how you should do it, which could allow for a standard use of trusted traveler, but not require it for the use of the profile. A good example for this in the Aries Interop profile is JSON LD credentials, BBS plus credentials, or mediator coordination, which isn't necessarily a requirement for all agents. So having a mechanism to have interoperability in those lesser cases could be beneficial.
Okay, I think that's something we can look at as we look at our profile once we have it put together to see if it makes sense to have some subsetting capability to identify sub-targets. I think as we produce our first draft of the Interop profile, that's a good time to bring that up and say, here's a recommendation for a likely subset of the features to make that useful. I would like to push off till another meeting time, a discussion of derivative credentials. It does appear to me that this is a topic that I think needs a fair amount of discussion. And that's how do you handle the myriad non-verifiable credentials that are being issued as either certificates or paper or all of the other strange and unusual ways to certify that you've had a vaccine or a test result or whatever the case may be, to how can we be more inclusive in the Cardea ecosystem to allow those to come in as either derivative credentials or some other mechanism. Some other mechanism I haven't thought of a good way yet, so that's why the discussion is titled derivative credential, so that we can look at how do we bring in those other types of credentials to allow governments to have better access to the health records around the globe, which are in multitudinous formats. So since it's a future discussion, I'm not going to ask for any comments on that. Just note that it's coming up. Are there any other topics that we should bring up today in the few minutes that are remaining? Or topics that need to be covered in the future?
We had penciled in some more discussion on the KYC process. I'm not sure if that is exciting to others. And if we should keep that as that was on sort of slated for next week, to dive in a little bit further into the KYC process and how we as a community should be focused on that. So I'm just curious if there's any feedback on what comes next.
KYC is a good one. Related to security, we've recently had a security test done, and the results of that will be here soon. And related to security is also user management or login. And so we may have a security discussion where there will be some bug fixes or additional features to add related to that category.
That's the security bit. There was another topic you mentioned, Mike, that I didn't. catch it.
Passwordless login or other login methods.
Which kind of falls under security,
Yeah, it's related.
depending on what that report says. It could all be in one discussion or separate discussions.
Okay. Other topics. Anyone else have a favorite topic they want to discuss?
Or a new topic.
To put on the agenda for future meetings? If not, we will, I think, wrap up today's meeting a little bit early, which will be a shocker to most of you, but I'm sure you'll recover soon. Thank you all for coming and for your participation and your contributions.
Thanks, Ken.
The end.